So, what's the connection between these three things? Double mint gum, Gina Davis, and non-stick cooking spray. While you think about that, welcome to episode 1 of Athletica Obscura, a new series where I tell stories of obscure people with interesting or weird connections to sports and non-sports things. Let's jump back to that question. 5 million imaginary points to you if you knew that the answer was a man named Arthur Meyerhoff. Now your next question is probably, well, who the hell is Arthur Meyerhoff? Well, he's probably best known as an advertising executive. He was kind of a Don Draper type in Chicago from the 1930s to the 1970s, but there's a couple weird and interesting twists to this story. In the early days back in the 20s, Meyerhoff was a bit of an inventor. He invented a new livestock feed and a new non-slip cover for pool stairs before he finally got into the advertising game in 1932. That's when he started his own Chicago ad agency called Arthur Meyerhoff Associates, appropriately. His big client at the time, his big fish that kept the bills paid, was none other than Wrigley Chewing Gum. And in Meyerhoff's first bit of Don Draper-type brilliance, Meyerhoff was the one who came up with the idea to advertise gum in the newspaper's comics section, so that kids would ask for Wrigley gums by name. His firm also came up with the ad slogan, "Double your pleasure, double your fun," and the Double Mint twins for Wrigley in the 1930s. Now here's where we get to the sports tangent of this story. It's the 1940s, World War II has broken out, and Meyerhoff's biggest client, Philip Wrigley, has his baseball team, the Chicago Cubs, depleted by the military draft. That's where Wrigley comes up with an idea that would become the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. If you're thinking to yourself, wow, this story's so good they should make a movie out of it, that's because you know damn well it already is a movie. Wrigley brought in his ad man, Meyerhoff, to oversee the nuts and bolts of the new league. Meyerhoff was in charge of things like operations, budgeting, governance, all those things the league needed to get off the ground. Our man Meyerhoff even made it into the movie adaptation of the AAGPBL story, A League of Their Own, where the character Ira Lowenstein, played by David Strathairn, is largely based on Meyerhoff.
Good luck, Mr. Lowenstein.
In 1944, in the late stages of the war, Philip Wrigley decided to get out of the baseball game to refocus on gum, and Arthur Meyerhoff made the move to buy the AAGPBL. And under Meyerhoff, the league flourished after the war. In fact, by 1948, the league had expanded to 10 teams and attendance topped 1 million. Now, that does it for the baseball part of this story, but I promised you one last butter-related twist, and it's a doozy. The name Arthur Meyerhoff may be all but forgotten today, but you actually see his name all the time when you go to the grocery store. That's because of a story that starts in the mid-1950s. When Meyerhoff overheard two chemists discussing the idea of an aerosol cooking spray that could be used as a substitute for butter. Meyerhoff hired the two chemists, got them to perfect the recipe, and put his name on the final product. He called it Product of Arthur Meyerhoff, or PAM, what we all know today as Pam Cooking Spray. Now, anyone can put their name on fake butter in a can, but this is where Meyerhoff's Don Draper side comes back into the story. Instead of marketing it with other aerosol products beside things like insecticide and hairspray, Meyerhoff campaigned grocery stores for Pam to be sold by the flour and the sugar in the baking aisle. And the rest is non-stick butter replacement history. And that about wraps up the Arthur Meyerhoff story. In 1979, he sold the ad agency that he founded to the industry heavyweights BBDO. In his 80s, he took up flying lessons, and he died in 1986. Anyways, that's the Arthur Meyerhoff story. Thank you so much for watching episode 1 of Athletica Obscura.